My name is Dr. Lauren Whitaker, and I've spent the last 15 years of my life building systems that protect this nation's most critical infrastructure. At 39, I've seen enough corporate politics to fill several lifetimes, but nothing quite prepared me for what happened that October when they thought they could simply delete my warnings and make the problems disappear. They thought erasing a memo could bury every warning I'd raised, but they forgot that Memo wasn't just paper or pixels on a screen. It was the final warning before the entire national security apparatus would realize who the real threat was. The morning it all began started like any other in my corner office at Regulus Secure Networks. 3 walls of monitors surrounded me, displaying real-time data flows from border checkpoints, power grids, and water treatment facilities across the country. Each blinking light represented a potential vulnerability, a possible breach, a life that could be endangered if we failed to do our jobs properly. I designed most of these monitoring systems myself, built them from the ground up with self-healing protocols that could detect and neutralize threats before human operators even noticed them. 15 years I'd been doing this work, 15 years of late nights, missed birthdays, and relationships sacrificed on the altar of national security. I didn't mind. This was my calling, my contribution to keeping people safe. The plaques on my wall testified to that dedication. Commendations from 3 different Homeland Security directors, patents for adaptive defense algorithms, and a photograph of me shaking hands with the Secretary of Defense after we'd prevented a major cyber attack on the Eastern power grid. But all of that meant nothing to Samira Vaughn. She'd arrived 6 weeks earlier, fresh from the acquisition that merged Regulus with Technovault Industries, a civilian tech company that made productivity software for corporations. At 28, she was everything the board wanted in a CEO Harvard MBA, connections in Silicon Valley, and a laser focus on profit margins that made shareholders swoon. What she didn't have was any understanding of what we actually did here, or why cutting corners in national security work wasn't just bad business, it was potentially catastrophic. The first sign of trouble came during her introductory all-hands meeting. She'd stood at the podium in our main conference room, her designer suit impeccable, her smile practiced, and told us how excited she was to optimize our processes and leverage synergies between our defense contracts and Technovault's commercial offerings. The days of bloated government contracts are over, she'd announced, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd never had to explain to a congressional hearing why a security breach had occurred. We're going to run lean, run smart, and deliver value to all our stakeholders. Marcus Dean, my lead data transmission engineer and closest friend at Regulus, had leaned over during the applause and whispered, "She has no idea what she's gotten into, does she?" I'd kept my expression neutral, but inside, a cold dread had settled into my stomach. I'd seen this before at other contractors. New management comes in, sees dollar signs instead of responsibilities, and starts cutting what they see as redundancies. Except in our world, redundancies weren't waste, they were the backup systems that kicked in when primary defenses failed. They were the difference between a minor incident and a national catastrophe. The real conflict began 3 weeks later when I discovered the vulnerability. I'd been running routine penetration tests on our automated border control systems, the network that processed passenger data, at every major port of entry in the country. These weren't just simple ID checks. The system cross-referenced travelers against dozens of databases, flagged suspicious patterns, and could lock down an entire terminal if it detected a serious threat. What I found made my blood run cold. Someone had modified the authentication protocols during the merger, probably trying to integrate Technovault's single sign-on system to improve user experience, as they like to say. But they'd done it wrong, catastrophically wrong. They'd created a backdoor that any competent hacker could exploit to access not just user credentials, but the entire passenger manifest database. Names, passport numbers, travel histories, security flags, all of it vulnerable. I spent the next 48 hours documenting everything. Screenshots of the corrupted code, network traces showing the vulnerability in action, and most importantly, a step-by-step remediation plan that would close the hole without disrupting operations. It would take my team about 2 weeks to implement, maybe 3 if we were being extra careful. A small price to pay for protecting millions of travelers' data. The memo I wrote was comprehensive but accessible. I'd learned long ago that executives needed things spelled out in simple terms. with clear consequences and actionable recommendations. I marked it with the highest priority classification our internal system allowed and sent it directly to Samira and the entire leadership team. The subject line was unambiguous: critical security vulnerability, immediate action required. 24 hours passed with no response. I followed up with a personal email to Samira, offering to brief her directly. Another day of silence. By the third day, when I tried to access my original memo in the system to forward it to our DHS liaison, I discovered it had been deleted. Not just removed from the active files, purged from the backup servers as well. Someone with administrative privileges had deliberately erased every trace of my warning. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. In 15 years, I'd never seen such a blatant disregard for security protocols. This wasn't incompetence. It was deliberate suppression of critical information. I tried to recreate the memo from my local files, but when I attempted to send it, I discovered my email access had been restricted. I could receive messages but couldn't send anything outside my immediate team. Even my calendar had been locked, preventing me from scheduling meetings with anyone above my direct supervisor. That's when the summons came. "Dr. Whitaker," Samira's assistant had said, her voice carefully neutral over the phone. "Ms. Vaughn would like to see you in conference room A in 15 minutes. Please bring any documentation related to your recent concerns." I knew what this was. I'd seen it happen to others who'd pushed too hard against the new regime. But I went anyway, armed with printouts of everything I could access and a recorder in my pocket, a habit I'd developed years ago after watching a colleague get scapegoated for a decision made above his pay grade. Conference room A was our executive briefing room, all dark wood and leather chairs designed to impress visiting officials. Samira sat at the head of the table, flanked by the new CFO, Richard Morse, and the head of project management, Diana Castellano. None of them had security backgrounds. They looked at me the way you might look at a mechanic who just told you your luxury car needed expensive repairs with suspicion and barely concealed irritation. "Dr. Whitaker," Samira began without preamble, "we need to discuss your recent activities and their impact on team productivity." My recent activities, I kept my voice level, professional. "You mean identifying a critical security vulnerability that could expose millions of travelers' personal data?" Richard Morse shifted in his seat. "What we mean is your tendency to overcomplicate matters that have already been reviewed and approved by the integration team." "The integration team doesn't have security clearances," I pointed out. "They don't understand the implications." "They understand efficiency," Diana interrupted. "They understand that we're 3 weeks behind schedule and 20% over budget on the merger integration. Every day we delay costs us money." I looked at each of them in turn, trying to find some glimmer of understanding. This isn't about money, this is about national security. If this vulnerability is exploited, if Samira emphasized the word like it was profanity. "Dr. Whitaker, you've been here a long time, perhaps too long. You see threats everywhere because that's what you've been trained to do. But we live in a different world now. Our competitors are moving fast, innovating, while we're stuck in Cold War paranoia." "The threats are real," I insisted, spreading out my documentation on the table. "Look at this. Here's the code modification. Here's how an attacker could exploit it. Here's what they could access." Samira didn't even glance at the papers. "What I see is an employee who's been explicitly told to work within the new framework, refusing to do so. Your memo was removed because it was inflammatory and counterproductive. We've already had the integration reviewed by our consulting partners at Technovault. They've assured us everything is secure." Technovault makes productivity software. I couldn't keep the frustration out of my voice anymore. "They don't understand secure systems architecture. They don't have clearances. They've never had to testify before Congress about why a breach occurred." "And neither will we." Samira cut me off. "Because there won't be a breach. You're creating problems where none exist. And frankly, Dr. Whitaker, it's becoming disruptive to the entire organization." Richard leaned forward, his expression sympathetic in that practiced way of someone about to deliver bad news. "We value your experience, Lauren. We really do. But we need team players right now. People who can adapt to change. If you can't do that..." He let the threat hang in the air. The message was clear: fall in line or face the consequences. In any other industry, I might have backed down. But this wasn't about office politics or corporate culture. This was about the safety of millions of people. I need to document my concerns, I said firmly. For the record, when DHS does their quarterly security audit, you'll document nothing. Samira's mask of professional courtesy finally slipped. Your email privileges have been restricted pending a review of your recent activities. You're not to discuss this matter with anyone, inside or outside the company. Any violation of this directive will result in immediate termination and potential legal action for breach of your confidentiality agreements. You can't. I can. And I have. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. Take the rest of the day off. Dr. Whitaker, think about whether you want to be part of Regulus's future or stuck in its past. We'll expect your decision by Monday. I gathered my papers slowly, maintaining eye contact with each of them. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully muzzled the canary in the coal mine. What they didn't understand was that I'd spent 15 years building these systems. I knew them better than anyone, including the backdoors and fail-safes I'd insisted on implementing despite protests about unnecessary complexity. As I walked back to my office, my mind was already working through possibilities. They could restrict my corporate email, but they couldn't restrict my access to the systems I'd designed, not without completely rebuilding them, which would take months and expertise they'd just finished alienating. Marcus was waiting by my door, his expression grim. At 55, he'd been with Regulus even longer than I had, starting as a junior engineer when the company was just 12 people in a strip mall office. His gray beard and perpetual flannel shirts made him look more like a lumberjack than one of the country's foremost experts on secure data transmission, which worked to his advantage. People underestimated Marcus, right up until they realized he could track a single packet of data across 17 different networks without breaking a sweat. "Heard you got called to the principal's office," he said quietly, following me into my workspace. I closed the door behind us and activated the white noise generator, another paranoid security measure that Samira would probably try to eliminate in the next round of cost-cutting. "They deleted my memo," I told him, "purged it from the system entirely." Marcus's expression darkened. "The border control vulnerability." I nodded. "They think it's not a problem because Technovault's consultant said so. Meanwhile, we're sitting on a ticking time bomb that could expose every person who's entered the country in the last 5 years. Jesus. He sank into one of my chairs, suddenly looking every one of his 55 years. "What are you going to do?" "What I always do," I said, already pulling up secure terminals that most people didn't even know existed. "Protect the system, with or without their permission." "Lauren," his voice carried a warning. "They're not playing around. Diana's already got a short list of contractors to replace anyone who doesn't fall in line. I've seen the proposals." "Then we'd better work fast." I turned to face him fully. "I need to know where you stand. Marcus, this is going to get ugly, and I won't think less of you if you want to keep your head down. You've got grandkids to think about." He was quiet for a long moment, then smiled that crooked smile that meant he was about to do something his wife would yell at him for. "You know, my grandson asked me last week what I do for a living. I told him I help keep bad people from hurting good people. Hard to do that with my head down." Relief flooded through me. I wasn't alone in this. "I need you to pull everything from the past 6 weeks, every code change, every access log, every modification to the authentication protocols. Route it through the secondary channels, not the main corporate network." "You're documenting for the audit." It wasn't a question. "I'm documenting for whatever comes next," I corrected. "But first, I need to show you something." I navigated to a section of the system architecture that appeared, to most observers, to be routine error logging. In reality, it was something I'd built into every major system I'd designed for Regulus, a canary protocol that monitored for specific types of vulnerabilities and anomalies. If triggered, it would automatically generate reports and, more importantly, send them through channels that corporate IT couldn't control. "You built a whistleblower into the system," Marcus breathed, admiration clear in his voice. "I built accountability into the system," I corrected. 5 years ago, when the Mannheim incident nearly took down the eastern seaboard's power grid because someone ignored security warnings, I swore I'd never let that happen again. But if they find out, they won't. It's designed to look like routine telemetry data. DHS receives millions of automated reports every day. This will just be one more. Unless I pulled up the configuration panel. Unless I flag it as critical and activate the bypass protocol. Marcus leaned forward, studying the screen. That would go directly to the Security Operations Center. Skip all the middle management, all the corporate filters. Exactly, but I need more than just my word. I need comprehensive documentation. Proof that this isn't some disgruntled employee making waves. I met his eyes. I need everything you can get me. For the next 3 days, we worked in careful coordination. Marcus used his administrative access to pull logs and documentation, while I carefully assembled a comprehensive report that laid out not just the vulnerability, but the deliberate suppression of my warnings. Every evening, I'd leave the office at my normal time, making sure to be seen by the security cameras, but I'd return after midnight, using my biometric access to enter through the loading dock, a perk of being essential personnel that they hadn't thought to revoke. The evidence we gathered was damning. Not only had someone deleted my memo, but they'd also attempted to modify the access logs to hide the deletion. Whoever had done it was good, but not good enough to fool someone who'd built the logging system in the first place. I found traces of their work buried in secondary backup systems that most people didn't even know existed. More troubling was what we discovered about the integration itself. Technovault hadn't just introduced vulnerabilities through incompetence, they deliberately weakened security protocols to make their single sign-on system work. Internal emails between Diana Castellano and Technovault's integration team discussed security theater and unnecessary redundancies that were slowing down the merger. One email, in particular, made my blood boil. Diana had written to Technovault's lead consultant, "Dr. Whitaker's team keeps raising obstacles. Can't you just make the changes and deal with any issues later? By the time they notice, it'll be too late to reverse without disrupting operations." They were deliberately creating a fait accompli, assuming that once the vulnerable system was in place, no one would risk the disruption of fixing it. They were probably right if I'd been anyone else. On Thursday night, as I sat in my darkened office surrounded by the glow of multiple monitors, I made my decision. I activated the Canary protocol, tagged the comprehensive report as critical, and set it to transmit to DHS's Security Operations Center at exactly 9:00 a.m. Friday morning, right when Samira would be in her weekly board call, unable to respond immediately. But I didn't stop there. I also programmed a secondary protocol, one that would monitor for any attempts to access or modify the vulnerability I'd identified. If anyone tried to exploit the weakness, whether an external hacker or someone within the company trying to cover their tracks, the system would immediately lock down and alert DHS. It was a calculated risk. If I was wrong, if the vulnerability was somehow less serious than I believed, I'd have just ended my career for nothing. But if I was right, and I knew I was, then I'd just put a ticking clock on Regulus's leadership. Friday morning came with deceptive normalcy. I arrived at my usual time, coffee in hand, and went through the motions of reviewing routine security reports. At 8:55 a.m., I saw Marcus pass by my office and give a subtle nod. He'd verified that all our documentation had been backed up to secure, off-site servers that couldn't be touched by corporate IT. At 9:00 a.m. exactly. I watched on my monitor as the Canary protocol activated. A burst of encrypted data shot through the network, past corporate firewalls and monitoring systems, directly to a server in Virginia, where someone with a much higher security clearance than Samira Vaughn would soon be reading about Regulus's cost-cutting measures. The first sign that something had changed came at 11:30 a.m. Brenda from HR practically ran past my office, her face pale and her phone clutched to her ear. 10 minutes later, I heard raised voices from the executive conference room down the hall. By noon, the entire C-suite was in crisis mode, though they were trying to keep it quiet. I maintained my routine, taking lunch at my usual time, chatting with colleagues about weekend plans. To anyone watching, I was just another employee, unaware of the storm brewing in the executive offices, but I kept my phone close, waiting for the call I knew would come. It came at 2:47 p.m. "Dr. Whitaker." The voice was crisp, professional, and unmistakably military. "This is Colonel Sarah Martinez from the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity Division. We need to discuss a report that was filed this morning regarding critical vulnerabilities in systems under your supervision." "Of course, Colonel," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline surge. How can I assist you? We're initiating an emergency security audit of Regulus Secure Networks. Effective immediately. A team is en route to your location. We'll need you to secure all relevant systems and prepare for a comprehensive review. Understood. I'll begin preparations immediately. One more thing. Dr. Whitaker. Under no circumstances are any modifications to be made to the affected systems until our team arrives. Any attempts to access or alter the vulnerable components will be considered obstruction of a federal investigation. Is that clear? Crystal clear, Colonel. As I hung up, I couldn't help but smile. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for someone to spring it. The DHS team arrived within 2 hours, a record response time that spoke to how seriously they were taking the threat. 6 agents in dark suits swept into our building, led by Colonel Martinez herself. She was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd risen through the ranks of military cybersecurity sharp-eyed, no nonsense, and utterly immune to corporate charm. Samira tried to intercept them in the lobby, all smiles and reassurances that this was just a misunderstanding. I watched from the security feed as Colonel Martinez cut her off mid-sentence. Ms. Vaughn, I'm not here for a meet and greet. My team needs immediate access to your Security Operations Center and all personnel with administrative privileges. Any delays will be noted in our report to the Secretary. The smile froze on Samira's face. This wasn't a situation she could MBA her way out of. Within minutes, the entire building was in controlled chaos. DHS agents stationed themselves at key terminals, while others began interviewing staff. I was called in for my interview almost immediately, bringing with me the boxes of documentation I'd been preparing. Colonel Martinez reviewed my materials with the intensity of someone who'd seen too many security breaches caused by corporate negligence. When she reached the emails between Diana and Technovault's team, her expression hardened. They deliberately weakened security protocols to speed integration, she stated. It wasn't a question. That appears to be the case, Colonel. My original memo outlined the risks in detail, but as you can see from the logs, it was deleted from our servers approximately 72 hours after I submitted it. And you're certain about the scope of the vulnerability? I pulled up a demonstration I'd prepared, showing exactly how an attacker could exploit the weakness. With the right knowledge, someone could access passenger manifests going back 5 years. Names, passport numbers, travel patterns, security flags, everything. Colonel Martinez was quiet for a long moment, then activated her radio. Martinez to all teams. Initiate full lockdown protocols. No data in or out until further notice. The next several hours were a blur of activity. DHS agents pored over every line of code, every email, every decision that had led to the current situation. I worked alongside them, providing context and technical expertise. Marcus was there too, his encyclopedic knowledge of our data transmission protocols proving invaluable. As the sun set over the Virginia hills, casting long shadows through the office windows, the full scope of the problem became clear. It wasn't just the border control systems. The hasty integration had created vulnerabilities in 3 other critical systems, including one that managed security clearances for federal contractors. But the real bombshell came when one of the younger DHS analysts discovered something in the logs that made everyone stop what they were doing. "Colonel," he said, his voice tight with concern, "someone's been probing the vulnerability. Multiple attempts over the past 48 hours, all from the same IP range." Colonel Martinez was at his terminal in 3 strides. "Show me." The traces were subtle, professional work that would have gone unnoticed by most monitoring systems, but my Canary protocol had caught them, flagging each probe as it happened. Someone had been testing the vulnerability, mapping its contours, preparing for... What? "Can you trace the source?" Colonel Martinez asked. The analyst's fingers flew over his keyboard. After a tense minute, he looked up with a grim expression. The probes originated from inside the Technovault network, someone with high-level access. The room went silent. This wasn't just negligence anymore. This was potentially espionage. Colonel Martinez turned to me. Dr. Whitaker, who at Technovault would have known about this vulnerability. Based on the email chains, at least 3 members of their integration team, their CTO and... I paused, putting pieces together. Their CEO, James Morrison. He was CC'd on several exchanges about streamlining security protocols. She immediately activated her radio again. Martinez to base. We need a full investigative team here now. Possible insider threat. Alert the FBI, this just became a counterintelligence matter. The transformation was swift and dramatic. What had started as a security audit became a full-scale federal investigation. FBI agents arrived within the hour, followed by forensic IT specialists, and even a few people whose affiliations were never quite explained, but who had the kind of quiet authority that suggested three-letter agencies. Samira, Richard, and Diana were sequestered in separate conference rooms for questioning. Through the glass walls, I could see Samira's composed facade cracking as federal agents laid out the evidence. Her lawyer, hastily summoned from DRC, looked increasingly uncomfortable as the scope of his client's liability became clear. Around midnight, as I was providing technical details to the FBI's cybercrime unit, Marcus appeared at my elbow with a cup of coffee and a tired smile. "You know they're done, right?" he said quietly. "Regulus. No way DHS renews the contract after this." I accepted the coffee gratefully. "I know. $500 million. Gone because they wanted to save a few weeks on integration." "You could have just let it slide," he pointed out. "Kept your head down, collected your paycheck. No one would have blamed you." "Yes, they would have," I replied. "I would have. When the breach inevitably happened, when people's lives were disrupted or worse, I would have known I could have prevented it." He nodded slowly. "So what's next for you after they finish burning this place down?" Before I could answer, Colonel Martinez approached. "Dr. Whitaker, a word." We stepped into an empty office, away from the organized chaos of the investigation. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply. "What you did took courage. Not many people would have risked their career to do the right thing." "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," she interrupted. "You chose to protect the system, even when the people running it didn't want protection. That's exactly the kind of person we need." She handed me a business card. "When this is over, and it will be soon, give me a call. DHS is establishing a new directorate focused on supply chain security for critical systems. We need someone to run it. Someone who understands both the technical and political challenges. Interested." I stared at the card, processing the offer. "You're offering me a job now." "I'm offering you a chance to make sure this doesn't happen again," she clarified. "To build security protocols that can't be overridden by the next CEO looking to boost quarterly profits, full autonomy, direct reporting to the secretary, and the resources to do the job right." It was everything I'd wanted at Regulus, but could never achieve under corporate leadership. When would I start? "As soon as we wrap this up, probably 2 weeks, maybe 3. We'll need you to help transition Regulus's systems to temporary federal management first." I pocketed the card. "I'll think about it." She smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from her. "Do that, but don't think too long. The offer won't stay open indefinitely." The next week was a whirlwind of controlled destruction. The FBI investigation expanded, pulling in Technovault's entire leadership team. It turned out the probes we detected were just the tip of the iceberg. James Morrison, Technovault's CEO, had been shopping access to the vulnerability to the highest bidder, using dark web brokers to maintain plausible deniability. The plan had been elegantly simple in its greed. Create the vulnerability during integration, sell access to it for millions, then discover and heroically fix the breach, positioning Technovault as the savior. No one would suspect the company that found and fixed the problem of causing it in the first place. Except they hadn't counted on a paranoid security engineer with a conscience and the foresight to build accountability into her systems. The press got wind of the story on Tuesday. By Wednesday, it was front-page news. "Major defense contractor compromised border security for profit," screamed the Washington Post. The New York Times ran a more measured but equally damning analysis of how the drive for efficiency had nearly caused a national security catastrophe. Regulus's stock price plummeted. Trading was halted twice as investors fled what was quickly becoming a toxic asset. The board of directors, finally awakened to the magnitude of their mistake, fired Samira, Richard, and Diana before the week was out. But it was too late. On Friday afternoon, Exactly 1 week after my Canary protocol had alerted DHS, the hammer fell. The Department of Homeland Security announced the immediate termination of all contracts with Regulus Secure Networks, citing gross negligence and willful endangerment of critical infrastructure. The contract, worth $500 million, vanished with a single press release. But the government couldn't simply abandon the systems Regulus managed. They were too critical, too integrated into national security. So DHS announced a temporary management structure, with a new directorate taking direct control of the affected systems until a suitable contractor could be found. The head of that directorate, Colonel Sarah Martinez, her first official act was to request the temporary assignment of key technical personnel who understood the systems. Which is how I found myself, on a gray Monday morning, standing in my old office for the last time as a Regulus employee. The monitors that had surrounded me for years were dark, the servers humming their familiar tune, but no longer under my watch. In a few hours, I'd walk out of this building and into a federal office across town, trading corporate politics for government bureaucracy. Marcus helped me pack the last of my personal items. The office felt smaller without all my equipment, just another cubicle in a building that would soon be empty. "You did it," he said, sealing a box of technical manuals I'd accumulated over the years. "You actually brought down the whole house of cards." "I didn't bring down anything," I corrected. "They did that themselves. I just made sure the right people were watching when it collapsed." Still, he leaned against the empty desk. "Takes guts to pull that trigger, knowing what would happen." "What would have happened if I hadn't was worse," I reminded him. "How many people's lives would have been destroyed if that vulnerability had been exploited? How many security operations would have been compromised?" He nodded, understanding the calculation I'd made. In our world, the math was always clear. Temporary corporate pain was always preferable to permanent damage to national security. A knock on the door interrupted our conversation. One of the federal transition team members stood in the doorway, tablet in hand. "Dr. Whitaker, we're ready for the final walkthrough whenever you are." I took one last look around the office that had been my second home for 15 years. So many late nights, so many crises averted, so many battles fought to keep the system secure. It was ending, but not in defeat. I'd won the only victory that mattered. The systems were safe. "Let's go," I said, picking up the last box. The walkthrough was thorough but efficient. I handed over access codes, explained quirks in the system that weren't in any manual, and introduced the federal team to the engineers who'd be staying on temporarily. Many were my people, loyal to the mission rather than the company. They'd keep the lights on while DHS figured out a permanent solution. As we finished the technical handover, I found myself in the executive conference room one last time. Through the windows, I could see the parking lot beginning to empty as employees left for what many knew would be the last time. Regulus Secure Networks, once a titan of the defense contracting world, was effectively dead. Dr. Whitaker, the transition team leader, a young man who reminded me of myself 15 years ago, looked up from his checklist. "We have one more item. The investigation team wants to know if you have any additional documentation regarding the Technovault integration that wasn't in your initial report." I smiled. "Everything relevant is in the report. Everything." He made a note, then hesitated. "Off the record, ma'am. How long did you know this would happen, the collapse? I mean, from the moment they deleted my memo." I answered honestly. When you try to hide problems in systems designed to reveal them, there's only one possible outcome. He absorbed that, then nodded. "Thank you for your service, Dr. Whitaker. The country owes you a debt." "The country owes the engineers who built these systems and the ones who'll maintain them going forward," I corrected. "I just did my job." The sun was setting as I carried the last box to my car. The building cast long shadows across the parking lot, and I noticed the Regulus logo had already been removed from the main entrance. By tomorrow, cleanup crews would begin the process of converting the space for its next tenant. Some other company would fill these offices, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded here. Marcus waited by my car, hands shoved in his pockets against the October chill. "So, you taking the Fed job?" he asked. "Already accepted," I confirmed, loading the box into my trunk. "Start next Monday, you." "Got an offer from the transition team to stay on for 6 months. help maintain the systems. He shrugged. After that, maybe retirement. I'm getting too old for this cowboys and Indian stuff. We stood there for a moment, two veterans of a war most people didn't even know was being fought. You know they'll try to spin this, he said eventually. Samira, the board, Technovault, they'll claim they were victims of circumstance, that you were a disgruntled employee who overreacted. Let them, I said. The evidence speaks for itself. The FBI has everything, every email, every deleted file, every attempt to cover their tracks. Their spin won't change the facts. And Morrison. Facing 25 to life for espionage, I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Turns out selling access to national security infrastructure to foreign actors is still taken seriously by some people. Marcus whistled low. Think he knew what he was getting into. I think he knew exactly what he was doing, I replied. He just didn't think anyone would catch him. They never do. A cold wind whipped through the parking lot, scattering leaves across the asphalt. It felt like an ending, but also a beginning. Keep in touch, Marcus said, extending his hand. The new job's going to need good people. I might know a few. I shook his hand firmly. I'll do that. The directorate's going to need all the help it can get. He headed to his own car, leaving me alone in the gathering dusk. I took one last look at the building that had been my professional home for so long. In a week, it had gone from a symbol of American technical prowess to a cautionary tale about what happens when profit trumps principle. But my systems would survive. They'd continue protecting the country under new management, with new safeguards to prevent another Samira Vaughn from putting them at risk. The Canary protocol I'd built had done exactly what it was designed to do: sound the alarm when human judgment failed. I got in my car and drove away, leaving Regulus Secure Networks to its fate. In my rearview mirror, the building grew smaller until it was just another structure among many, indistinguishable from any other corporate office. My phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Martinez. See you Monday. We have work to do. Indeed we did. The threats facing our nation's infrastructure weren't going away. If anything, they were becoming more sophisticated, more targeted. But now I'd have the authority to build defenses without corporate interference, to put security first without worrying about quarterly earnings or integration deadlines. They'd deleted my memo, thinking they could make the problem disappear. Instead, they'd deleted themselves from the equation entirely. There was poetry in that, a kind of justice that no court could have delivered. As I drove home through the Virginia countryside, I thought about the memo that had started it all. Such a simple thing, a few pages outlining a vulnerability and recommending fixes. In most companies, it would have been handled quietly, professionally. The vulnerability would have been patched, the system secured, and everyone would have moved on. But Samira Vaughn had wanted to run lean, to cut what she saw as redundancy and red tape. She'd gambled that the warnings were overblown, that the risks were theoretical rather than real. It was a bet that many executives make, trading long-term security for short-term gains. This time, the house won. I pulled into my driveway as the last light faded from the sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new systems to secure, new executives to convince that yes, security really was that important. But tonight, I'd allow myself a moment of satisfaction. They'd thought they could delete my warnings and make the dangers disappear. They'd learned, too late, that in the world of cybersecurity, deleted files have a way of coming back to haunt you. Every action leaves a trace, every decision creates a record, and every vulnerability eventually gets exploited. I tried to tell them that. I'd put it all in a memo, carefully documented and properly submitted through official channels. They'd chosen to delete it, to pretend the problems didn't exist. A week later, Homeland Security had deleted their contract. Justice, I reflected as I unlocked my front door, didn't always come from courtrooms or congressional hearings. Sometimes it came from engineers who understood that their first duty was to the systems they built and the people those systems protected. Sometimes it came from refusing to stay silent when silence would be profitable but wrong. Sometimes it came from building canaries into coal mines, knowing that someday, someone would try to shut them up. They'd deleted my memo, but they couldn't delete the truth, and in the end, that's what brought them down, not corporate politics or personal vendettas, but the simple, immutable fact that vulnerabilities don't care about quarterly earnings. The lights of my house welcomed me home. I had a week to prepare for my new role, to think about how to build systems that couldn't be compromised by the next executive looking to make their mark. It wouldn't be easy. Government work never was. But it would be important. And that's all that had ever mattered to me. Somewhere in a federal detention center, James Morrison was probably contemplating his choices, wondering how his brilliant plan had fallen apart so completely. Somewhere in a law firm's conference room, Samira Vaughn was probably strategizing with her attorneys, looking for someone else to blame for her failures. And somewhere in Virginia, in an anonymous server farm, my canary protocol continued its watch, ready to sing out warnings to anyone willing to listen. They'd thought they could silence it with a simple deletion. They'd thought wrong, and that miscalculation had cost them everything. I poured myself a glass of wine and raised it in a silent toast to everyone who'd ever been told their warnings were inconvenient, their concerns overblown, their expertise unnecessary, to everyone who'd been ordered to stay quiet when speaking up could have prevented disaster, to everyone who'd refused. The wine was good, a small luxury I rarely allowed myself, but tonight felt like a celebration, even if I was the only one who understood what there was to celebrate. A disaster averted, a threat neutralized, a system saved from those who would have sacrificed it for profit. My phone buzzed again. Marcus. This time. Just saw the news. FBI arrested 3 more Technovault executives. The whole network's unraveling. I smiled and typed back, good. Maybe the next company will think twice before compromising security for convenience. Maybe, but probably not. Job security for people like us, right? He had a point. There would always be another Samira Vaughn. Another executive who thought security was optional. Another company willing to roll the dice with other people's safety. But there would also always be people like us, building safeguards and raising alarms, refusing to let convenience trump conscience. It was a war that would never end, fought in server rooms and boardrooms, with weapons made of code and policy. But it was a war worth fighting, especially when the people you were protecting didn't understand the danger they were in. I finished my wine and headed to my home office. Monday would come soon enough, bringing new responsibilities and new challenges. But first, I had a system to design, one that would make the Canary Protocol look primitive by comparison, one that would ensure no future executive could delete warnings without consequences. They'd thought deleting a memo could make problems disappear. Instead, they'd deleted themselves from the future of American cybersecurity. I opened my laptop and began to work, fingers flying over the keyboard as ideas took shape. Outside, the October night grew cold and still, but in my office, the screens glowed with possibility. The memo they'd deleted had been a warning. What I was building now would be a guarantee. And this time, there would be no delete button.